Very good evening to all my dear students. Welcome to English online class. So today we are going to discuss a new chapter, that is Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom. Somebody has demanded in the group, so we are going to start, though let me tell you that we have already discussed this chapter. So it's just like a revision of this chapter once again. So it will be clear to you all, as it is a very important chapter. This is this is an autobiography of the first black president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. What he did for his country, how he struggled, and how he achieved democracy for himself as well as for the people of his nation. All these things are mentioned in this chapter. As I can see, the link has been shared. Yes, good evening Ankush, Priya, good evening, Malay Mishra, good evening. First let me know that am I audible? Is there any kind of disturbance? Good evening all of you. Am I audible or not? Or is it any kind of a disturbance that you are hearing from your side? Okay. So as I was telling you that we already had discussed this chapter, Nelson Mandela Long Walk ago, I think 1 month ago. But any which ways, as per the demand of the students, I have to, again start this chapter, as it is a very important chapter. Nelson Mandela Long Walk to Freedom is a very important chapter, and what I believe that this time this chapter is definitely be coming in your board exam for the long questions. So Nelson Mandela is a story of, is an autobiography, you can say, of first black president of South Africa, what he did in his life, how he struggled, and ultimately he achieved democracy in South Africa for himself as well as for the citizens of the country. Before you read, apartheid is a political system that separates people according to their race. Okay, apartheid system we must be knowing. This means that the people discriminate on the basis of caste or color. Can you say which of these three countries below had such a political system until very recently? United States of America, South Africa, and Australia. Have you heard of Nelson Mandela? Yes. Mandela and his African National Congress spent a lifetime fighting, good evening all of you, fighting against apartheid. Mandela had to spend 30 years in prison. Finally, democratic elections were held in South Africa in 1994. And Mandela became the first black president of a new nation. In this extract from his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, Mandela speaks about a historic occasion. Speaks about a historic occasion, the inauguration. Can you guess what the occasion might be? Check your guess with the new lists. Okay. Yes, correct, Kushagra. It was a long fight for discrimination, against discrimination, not for discrimination. It was a long fight against discrimination between blacks and whites. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had to pleasantly besieged by dignitaries. Who is I here? Obviously, it's an autobiography, so I is Nelson Mandela. Besieged means surrounded closely by world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on South African soil. So Nelson Mandela was surrounded by so many officials who came from the different parts of the world. Okay, the ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater. Amphitheater is a building without a roof with many rows and seats, just like a stadium, cricket stadium. Okay, good evening, Arun. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheater found by the Union buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was a site of rainbow gathering of different colors and nations of the installation of South Africa's first democratic, non-racial government. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. So Nelson Mandela's daughter was Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president. So on the day of the new democratic situation, in a new democratic environment, on the podium means on the mic, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as a second deputy president. So Mr. de Klerk became the second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the Constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the Republic and its people. To the assembled guests and watching world, I said, so it was a speech that he made when he became the president of South Africa, Democratic South Africa. Today, all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn. Confer means here, and hope to newborn liberty. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. We who were outlaws not so long ago have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. We thank all our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of a country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. We have at last achieved a political emancipation. Emancipation means freedom from restriction. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. So that was the motive of Nelson Mandela. He wanted to free from the bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination that were happening in South Africa. Never, 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 and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. Reign means rule. God bless Africa. So whatever he determined during his childhood days, during his youth age, he had achieved due to hard struggle, along with the other leaders. After that, he made that speech. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters, and troops carrier rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. And when he delivered his speech, what he observed, and not only he, but all the citizens of South Africa, they observed South African jets, helicopters, and troops, paragliders, they were all in the air, in the sky. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. Only moments before, the highest general of South African Defence Force and Police, their chest bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. So everybody had shown a very great a very kind gesture towards the president of South Africa by doing march past, and the other leaders bore ribbons and the medals on the chest and they saluted the president. It was not unmindful of the fact, unmindful means of aware of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. So these were the same people who were after the life of Nelson Mandela when he was trying to fight against the discrimination. But that day when he became the president, the first black president of South Africa, the same people who had an intention to arrest him, they were saluting him. Finally, a chevron. Chevron means a pattern in the shape of V of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. So the flag was installed and it started fluttering because of the wind. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of two national anthems. This is an important point. So the day was inaugurated, it was celebrated by playing two national anthems, the Vision of the Whites singing Nkosi Sikelel, Africa, and blacks singing Dice Them, the old anthem of Republic. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem, once they despised, they would soon know the words of heart. Okay, many of the people, those who were gathered on the streets, they did not know the lyrics of the new anthem, but still the people sang it, okay, with full enthusiasm. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with the sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after a bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my birth, the white-skinned people of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. One mistake is there, you can see in your books, the spelling of people is incorrect. It is written peoples, so just change it. Now Nelson Mandela was remembering those days when he used to suffer and the other black people in South Africa used to suffer the dominance of the white people and the effects of discrimination. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhuman societies of the world has ever known. Now in the last decades of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all the people regardless of the color of their skin. Again, the spelling of the people is wrong, it's written S, so just change it in your book. The plural form of the people is only people, not peoples. Now this much have you understood? If you people have understood this much, please acknowledge me, show me a thumbs up. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. So he was not only appreciating his own efforts and the other leaders' effort, but also Nelson Mandela appreciated and honored the efforts of those old leaders who struggled hard to achieve democracy for South Africa, but at that point of time they all were not present. Why? Because they all were dead. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them because they struggled and they died. So Nelson Mandela said that I am very much willing to thank them, but I cannot. And they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. So it was not the single effort of Nelson Mandela, but a cumulative effort of the leaders in the past as well. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from the profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that is it produced the Oliver Tambos. These are the important names, please note it down, mark it down. एग्ज़ाम में नाम पूछे जाते हैं कि those who were the leaders in the past before Nelson Mandela who struggled in order to achieve democracy for the nation. So you can write these names. And that was that it produced Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisselus, the Chief Lathilius, and Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Subovicis of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depth of operations to create such heights of characters. My country is rich in minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. So this was a ideology of Nelson Mandela. That's why he did for his country, for the people of South Africa, and because he considered that the people of South Africa are just like diamonds and are the purest than any other wealth in the world. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives of an idea. I have seen men stand up attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Okay, so this is a very important line. He says that courage was not the absence of fear. Fear to rehta hai, but triumph over it. If you conquer the fear, then only you will be called courageous man, otherwise not. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So that was the motto of Nelson Mandela, and because of this motto, he gained confidence, energy, and ultimately he did what he wanted. No one is born hating another person because of the color of skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So that is what it says, that love is inborn, but the hatred is taught. If a hatred can be taught, love can also be taught, because the love comes naturally. Even in the grimmest times in prison, grimmest means very gloomy times, sad times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. इंसान की जो अच्छाई होती है वो धीमी हो सकती है, that can be hidden also, but it can never be extinguished. उसकी अच्छाई को कोई बुझा नहीं सकता. In life, every man has twin obligations, and this is a practical truth. So according to Nelson Mandela, he says that every man has twin obligations. Obligation means duty, two obligations. First is obligation to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. So that was a condition before Nelson Mandela became the president. The people were dominated by the white people. The black people were dominated by the white people. They were tortured. There was no freedom of speech, expression, or anything for the black people. I did not, in the beginning, choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. So when he was young, he was not at all bothered about the freedom for the country. When Nelson Mandela was a child, was a young boy, he only focused on fulfilling the obligation towards his family, towards his mother, towards his father, towards his siblings. But he never focused on different aspects that what the people, especially the black people in South Africa, were facing. I was not born with hunger to be free. I was born free, free in every way what I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. And freedom is, authority for each and everyone. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion. When I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me. So when he grew up, then he realized that his freedom was taken by the white people, that I began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself. The transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. So he had obligations toward his family. He wanted to marry, he wanted to start his own family, but on the other side, he was being dominated. Not only he, but the other black people were being dominated by the white people. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were also not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, reduced, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. That is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger of my own freedom became the greater hunger of the freedom. So ultimately, he decided to leave the obligations towards his family for a while and to serve for the nation, and because of that motive, he joined African National Congress. This much, students, if you have understood, please acknowledge me, show me thumbs up. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives in dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home. So he left his home, he left his family and started serving for his nation, that forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man. But I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains of any one of my people were the chains of all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated, just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed for their humanity. Oppressor कौन होता है? जो प्रॉब्लम झेलता है. Oppressed और oppressor कौन होता है? जो प्रॉब्लम देता है. The dominated person is oppressed and the person who is dominating is an oppressor. तो दोनों ही कहीं ना कहीं फ्रीडम में नहीं होते हैं, according to Nelson Mandela, and this is a fact. So that was a complete story of an autobiography of Nelson Mandela, that how he struggled, what was his thought. As we discussed a few important points, there are certain important points in this chapter. The first thing is that when he was young, he did not focus towards the freedom of South Africans. He was totally busy in his own world, towards his family. He had an obligation towards his family. But when he grew up, he became adult, then he thought that his freedom is also curtailed. And then only he took a major step. He became just like a monk. He left his family. He left all his obligation towards his family members, and after that what happened? He joined Congress, African National Congress Party. And then he struggled. And in his speech, one more important thing is, as I told you, the names of the leaders in the past were also important. After that what happened? Nelson Mandela says that he would like to thank all the leaders, those who struggled in the past before him, in order to attain the freedom for South African people. He wanted to thank on that day, but unluckily all those leaders died. So that was a guilty that left in the heart of Nelson Mandela. So I suppose that you people must have understood this chapter. Read this chapter once again more. कुछ पॉइंट्स हैं जो नहीं समझ में अगर आते हैं तो यू आर ऑलवेज वेलकम टू आस्क मी थ्रू विजडम ग्रुप. And one more task I am going to give you today, that practice the questions. Questions are mentioned at the end of the chapter. Start discussing the answers. Keep on writing the answers and send it to me through the group so that I can check that how much knowledge you have achieved from this chapter. If you people face any doubt, any problem, any question you have, you can simply ask through Wisdom Group. Certain important points that I have explained and I told you to jot it down in the notebook or mark down in the book. These points are very, very essential. So it is very important for you to go through these points and use these points while writing the answers. If you would like to ask anything, you can ask right now. Okay, as I can see that nobody is putting up questions, nobody has query right now. So okay, no problem. As I told you, read this chapter. If you still find any difficulty, you are free to ask me through Wisdom Group. Till then, thank you so much. God bless you all. Take care and utilize this time for upgrading yourselves. God bless you. Thank you so much.